Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is kind of a bit of a match preview, a little bit different. I'm here with my old man again,
Hey, Connor.
twice in the last couple of weeks, really, which is quite unusual. We've got the second mic out. We've just been drenched going out for an egg and sausage sandwich. But yeah,
it was only sunny half an hour ago, wasn't it? And all of a sudden, it feels like it's -10.
it is. Yeah, it does feel like that. It's all of a sudden it's cold. It's drab, and it's England / just Manchester.
Manchester, isn't it? Yeah.
So, how are you feeling that we've not caught up since last week? Really, we were just speaking upstairs and having a bit of a natter, and we said that it's really criminal that we're not getting a lot of this on record. It's probably not going to be the most positive chat, but it's difficult at the minute, isn't it, to really to talk like that? In fact, it's very, you kind of want to be having positives and this and that to say, but it's just with Leeds at the minute, it feels quite downtrodden.
I think there are positives. We can glean something from the current situation, Connor. I mean, we certainly for the Villa game. I think the last time we spoke, it was pre-Villa, wasn't it? For the Villa game, obviously I was down there. You know, had a real feeling when you're at the stadium about the way in which it was going. The atmosphere was unbelievable in that first half, and we really had a head of steam going. But you could feel just towards the end of the game there that it was starting to run away from us a little bit, and they were getting more into it. And then I felt that the start we had, when the second half kicked off, obviously they scored almost immediately. I felt as though the second half kind of ebbed away from us a little bit. And there was a feeling again, once, I know we spoke about it last time around, an inevitability about the way in which it was going to go. And that's exactly what happened. So, we lost the game. It's 3 on the bounce now. We seem to be in a little bit of a rut, but there were positives. If we could play with that level of commitment and passion, like we did at the start of that game against Villa, and play like that and have those fitness levels, because I feel as though, I was worried, I must admit, when I was watching the game, thinking, can we really keep this up? Bielsa-esque, if you like, this level of commitment and fitness that's going to see us through a full 90 minutes to get a win. I seriously doubted it, and I felt that played a hand in the defeat as well. So the positive is we were in the game. I thought we were dictating it for large portions of it during the first half. But there was that inevitability that it was going to move away from us in the second, and that's exactly what happened. But I feel as though if we can raise our game away from home, which we desperately need to do, then there is hope.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, to a certain degree. I mean, yeah, away from home, it's going to be difficult. Recently, coming up, and we were just talking about Fulham. We were speaking about their fixtures coming up, because we've got to be looking at that. West Ham, teams in there at Forest, I guess, but we're in games at this moment in time. It feels like Leeds are in games, but it's that closing out of the points. It's the closing out of those second halves, which is becoming a massive problem for Leeds. We go to Man City at the weekend, and what I guess, we were chatting about it this morning, but I don't really know. I think best case scenario is keeping it to just like 3 in it at this moment in time.
Well, it is, we're going into this game massive underdogs, but we've been in this position before. We managed a 2-0 win there, didn't we, a few years back? So we have been in these positions where we've been playing teams like City away, even Liverpool. That might be an easier fixture now, playing them away at this moment in time. So you just never know. The odds are massively against us. We know that. If we can pick anything up, or at least keep the score level down, it's going to be some form of victory for us. But there's no doubt you can't hide from the fact, Connor. This game tomorrow and the subsequent games that are coming up, really, I think until mid-January, we are going to be up against it. And just trying to envisage where we do pick up a point here and there is very hard to imagine at this stage, I think.
Yeah, I think we were just talking about it as well, like how kind of you just feel on your arse a little bit with Leeds at the minute, don't you? I was doing a shoot yesterday and was speaking to all of these fans in and around the club, in and around, their clubs and stuff like that. And a lot of big clubs there who've managed to come up to the Premier League and actually establish themselves as a mainstay. And some of them are big clubs, and they've managed to do that, Forest, Villa, West Ham, Newcastle. I know it's been a while since they've come up, but they've come up as big clubs and been able to establish themselves. And just feels with Leeds, it's just a constant battle with just security at the top and just the right decisions being made. And I guess that is the controversial decision right now when it comes to Farke, the managerial choices he had. I probably thought it was his most controversial presser yesterday. Obviously, we've spoken a little bit about it. But the conversation now is it's timing, isn't it? When do you get rid? Is it going to be immediately after this City game if we get absolutely thwacked, or is it going to be the case of they're going to give him until the Brentford game? Because I can't imagine them like sacking him. Let's say, because the likelihood is we lose tomorrow. Anything could happen, but the likelihood is we lose. But then I can't see them sacking him after the Chelsea and Liverpool game. Then, so then it feels like it funnels on then to maybe Brentford potentially.
Well, I think I mean, it's a well-worn path, this, Connor, from your point of view. I know you've spoken an awful lot about it and your feelings about Farke, and I think we reflect one another on that one. For me, I'd rather get the job done with Farke sooner rather than later. I don't see him turning us around. I still feel as though this current crop of players that we've got is a better crop of players that we had 4 or 5 years ago when we went up last time round, and I feel as though another manager could do more with these players than Daniel Farke currently has done. I feel as though we need to get rid of him now. I don't care whether we've got a difficult patch coming up or not. So, well, a new coach would want to buy into that, knowing that he's got 5 or 6 games where it's a real tough run. It's going to be 5 or 6 games before he can notch some kind of a record in the positive column for Leeds. So, but in terms of making the decision, for me, it should be made now. It may be made tomorrow after tomorrow's game, depending on the scoreline. We're hoping that, we can get something out of it. But if we end up getting smashed tomorrow and we end up conceding 5 or 6 goals, that could well be the tipping point as far as Farke's concerned.
But it comes down to the conversation again as well of like the ownership, and you can point the finger at Farke as much as you want, but it sounds daft in a strange sort of sense, but he's kind of like directing I thought a fair bit sort of passively towards them yesterday in the press conference as well. I said to them what I needed, and we are where we are, sort of thing.
Yeah, he's got a big part to play in that, and at the end of the day, it's a difficult one, this, because everybody's slamming the 49ers, and I'm not an apologist for them, Connor. It's a joint situation we're in here. They've got a big part to play in this, just like he has. He's the manager at the end of the day. He's got the personnel on the pitch, and there's no way in a million years that Daniel Farke didn't have a major say in what's going on right now. The setup.
Well, we know he did. We know he did. He's admitted it. He's admitted it.
And you also got to look at the facts as far as the 49ers are concerned. You look at the spend during the summer, and the spend was the 10th highest in the Premier League. You take out the top 4 biggest spenders who spent way more than everybody else, and we actually spent the 6th highest. So, like I say, I'm no apologist for them, but they're well within the rights to say, well, we have backed you, Daniel.
But I guess then the problem would be if you've got like Adam Underwood who's been promoted and put in charge. If I'm playing devil's advocate here, he's been put in charge. There's been Jordan Miles has left, Steinson's left, Hammond's left. There's been a massive change at Leeds when it comes. I mean, going from that, to the Premier League, that's I guess that's kind of a big problem in itself, because you're transitioning upwards, which is a big problem when you've had and obviously they couldn't do anything about some of the changes. However, the whole point is here, he's had a say in recruitment, but then it's who they bring in, isn't it? They spend 100 million quid, but it's who they bring in, and that balance could have been tweaked by maybe bringing in a Pajau or a Rodrigo Muniz, and we could be talking about something definitely different. But Farke was talking when they signed Dominic Calvert-Lewin in a press conference of how much he rates him, how he's loved him for years, how he had to convince him and all this sort of stuff. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin, as I've mentioned to you, is always seemingly in my comment section anyway, and in the general media, the lightning rod for a lot that's going wrong at Leeds in terms of why would you spend all this money on him. But Farke was a big advocate of him, and it's not just Farke's fault, but I think it's multifaceted, these levels of problems.
It is. It's a mix of everything. And what we sometimes you fail to remember is the fact that we were abject in trying to move people on during the summer. Absolutely abject, and that was just as important as bringing personnel in.
With Jack Harrison had to go, Mele had to go, Peru had to go. There's so many of them had to go.
So we had probably, really, in terms of personnel that are still there, we've probably got between 20 and 30 million pounds worth of talent, which really isn't adequately being used, which we could have used in the transfer market and could have brought in people like Statistical, who eventually went to Sunderland. So it's not just about who we brought in; it's where we failed to move people on. And you're quite right; it is multifaceted. Underwood came in. I was worried about that right from the start. I know Orta has been slammed through the years, but at least he's a guy who's got experience in going out there and bringing people in and moving people on. So we were coming into a brand new venture in the top league in the world with a rookie leading the way. But let's be honest, Connor, you know, most of us, with the exception of that last probably 3 to 4 weeks of the window, were saying we'd had a brilliant window. And that tends to be forgotten. Everybody, you know, from the end of May, when the recruitment process started, people were saying, well, we've got this player, we've got Bijol in, Stack's coming, we've got this, you know, we've got Perry, he's coming in. All of a sudden, the optimism started to grow, and people were saying, do you know what? This is the best window I've seen at Leeds in years. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, it feels like probably the end of it was the big issue, wasn't it? It was the end of it. It was the fact that, you know, Leeds kind of, it felt like anyway, they're after players and they couldn't get players. Pajal fell through. Muniz clearly was someone who they were interested in. But then we got told, or the media narrative by The Athletic was that Leeds were always after Dominic Calvert-Lewin. But Dominic Calvert-Lewin was taken away by the fact that Everton wanted to keep him, which, to be fair, on the blue side, they said they did want to keep him. They offered him a contract. You know, multiple clubs, apparently including Newcastle, offered him deals, but it was too short for what Calvert-Lewin wanted. He's now on a 3-year deal, but it felt like that was a common consensus through the club. And we were speaking about it last night when it comes to maybe some of the failings of the department, maybe when it comes to depth. Like, I guess Bornau is probably someone who you look at who appears to be injured again. And, you know, you spend I know it's not a lot of money, but it's a flash in the pan. It might still be something of which Leeds could have gone and got a loan towards the back end of the window with those wages, that distribution. Yeah. And you bring in Bornau. I don't think Bornau, we mentioned this last night. I said this to you. I don't think Bornau, worst case scenario, would even start for Leeds. I think if Beale was out or Strout was out or Rodon was out and someone had to step in, I think he'd go someone like Ampadu. I think that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at the spend, we've just spoken about that, you know, and in all honesty, Connor, we're not really utilising that spend, are we? Because we've probably got 25 to 30 million pounds worth of talent not featuring in the first team squad week in, week out. And again, you know, even though, you know, you could argue that the board did support Daniel in the window, you can't get away from the facts. I still think this crop of players that we've got are a better crop of players we had compared to the last time we went up. And I still firmly believe that a different manager could get more from these players. Yeah. But you can't get away from the facts that we had 8 championship players finishing the game against Villa. 8 championship players. Just think about that. You know, certainly know that Burnley and Sunderland don't have that level of championship representation in the first team squad.
Burnley probably do.
Maybe Burnley, but certainly not as much. 8 players. So, you know, we're always going to be struggling. You know, if you're featuring a championship team, even though they were the best in the championship last year, and even though I think these championship players could do a job in the Premier League, that's a solid, sobering fact.
Is it also a problem for you when there's conversations of, and we've heard it a couple of times now, but I think Farke has mentioned it. He said and it was lost in translation a little bit yesterday at the presser, but it was our aim was to finish 17th, or our aim was to finish just above 17th. I get that as a measure, but you kind of want to be saying you aim as high as you can to then potentially fall.
That's absolutely. You know, if you're aiming for 17th, and I think that's just a figure of speech from Daniel. I think really at the end of the day, what they are aiming for, even though they might say that to the press, is covering his backside by saying that if we finish in 17th, that's a victory for him. But I'm sure in the back of his head, he's not thinking 17th because that's too close to call. You know, he's aiming for a mid-table position. That's what he's thinking. He's thinking this group of players needs to get me to that point. But if we end up in 17th, then, you know, I've succeeded in my first season. I've kept us in the Premier League. So I think you should take what he's saying there with a bit of a pinch of salt, in all fairness. But, you know, the fact is that for me, Daniel's done what he was for me, he was employed to do. He's got us out of that stinking league. He's very good at doing that. He's got us into the Premier League, but we should have terminated his contract at the end of the last year. Should have done that. Didn't happen. And we are where we are now.
Well, I wanted to bring you up as well on something that you said last night to me. Yeah. You said, would there ever be a scenario where they kept hold of Daniel Farke because he'd then get us up from the Championship? And I kind of wanted to get into that because as well, I was mentioning to you last night, there's a scenario with Wolves when it comes to what they're about to do. You know, they're going into January, 0 points out of 12 games, 7 goals in 12. What do? Do you go with 150 million Hail Mary to keep you in the Premier League? Or do you start preparing, a la Ipswich, bringing in the likes of Jadon Philogene in January when they were in the Premier League, of preparing for the Championship? And I guess that, in a strange sort of way, is the same correlation with Leeds. It's what do you do right now? Do you prepare for the championship? That is so loser faceted, and I think that is so weak mentality to do that. And then I mentioned to you as well that if you do that, and I get the logic behind it, but if you do that, because we've seen that the ownership don't learn, we could be in an exact same situation in 2 years' time where they're fan-led and Farke gets us up again. They're so fan-led, they don't make a decisive decision. If they are still in ownership of the football club, because we've spoken about Red Bull, will they take charge? And maybe that's a different conversation. Will they take charge? Will they start to buy off the 49ers? Can the 49ers be asked going down to the championship again when they clearly see Leeds as this Premier League side, but they've maybe not got it right, if you're to believe some. So it's a layered question, really. But where would you stand with that? And
yeah, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, that's not the way as a football club we should be thinking. But it also makes sense to prepare for the future. You should always have the best laid plans in place for the worst case scenario. But I couldn't help it. It was something that just came to me the other day. I'm thinking, is there something in keeping Daniel Farke, knowing that there's an inevitability almost that we will end up in the championship, knowing that he's extremely good at getting teams out of the championship and back into the Premier League? I agree with you. I mean, that's a very defeatist attitude, and I'm sure that's not the attitude the club's got. They're thinking the opposite way. They're thinking Daniel Farke at this stage is the man to keep us in the league. But we are going to be in that situation. At the end of the day, we're going to be in a situation where we are fighting for Premier League survival, certainly right up until the end of the season. And if it doesn't go to plan, then Leeds are going to end up back where we came from. And then what we're going to do, we're going to stick with the present guy if he's still in charge at that point, or do we start searching for somebody else that we feel can get us out of that league and back into the Premier League? It's an interesting question, isn't it? I don't think it's something that they're actively thinking about at the moment. They firmly believe that Daniel Farke is the man to keep us in this league. I'm sure they're not planning for the possibility that it could get us out of the championship and back into the Premier League.
What are you making of the 49ers? Well, how would you evaluate, I guess, their term at Leeds United so far?
I just don't feel as though they're actively involved in the club, Connor. I just don't get that impression, and maybe there's a distraction.
Is the distraction coming from north of the border?
It could well be. It could well be. I mean, certainly in terms of Parag, you feel as though maybe the guy's got. It seems to me like he's got too many eggs to deal with in the basket, if you like. If that's the phrase I'm looking for. He's got certain
spinning too many plates.
Yeah, he's got certain commitments over the pond, big commitments. He's still responsible to the York family over there. He's got Leeds, which an extremely big fish over here. And now he's got Rangers to deal with as well. So you're quite right. There's quite a few plates spinning all at the same time. I'm just wondering if he's been distracted from that. But, there is a board as well down at Ellen Road. There's a structure down there that should be interested in Leeds United and keeping us in this division. But I'm not wholly impressed. There's been changes. You get the feel that, this conglomerate of investors that we have in charge of the club may not be football people. We certainly know they're not. A lot of them are just in it for the money and to trying to improve their investment. And you just worry a bit that, we don't have proper football people in charge of the club, and we certainly don't have the Tony Bloom kind of characters in charge, do we? Who seem to know how to run a football club.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Bloom, Benham. It'd be lovely to have that sort of level of ownership, of which it's it's calculated. It's, I guess, the perfect example of that, and someone who we're probably going to speak about in general anyway, is Keith Andrews. And it's not to take too much away from Keith Andrews, but it didn't feel like he was obviously there. He didn't feel like he was their first choice anyway, and we all know he wasn't their first choice. But it's top down, isn't it? And it feels like with Bournemouth now, I was having a chat about it with a couple of people the other day. It feels like Bournemouth now, if Iriola was to leave, they've got to step in. You look at, we can go, we can go all the way back to Brighton, where it is, they had Chris Hughton, then Potter came in.
Yeah.
Potter left to go to Chelsea. De Zerbi came in. De Zerbi leaves, and then to go to Marseille. I can't remember if he was relieved of his duties. Then Herzler comes in. It is seamless, and it's a top-down methodology of which is successful nowadays. And it just seems to move in a seamless. It seems to move in a seamless way. It seems to move in such a sort of just a smooth way is probably the right way of putting it. Whereas with Leeds, it feels like, and maybe they're thinking that if we did get rid of Daniel Farke, we could, like you said, if there's not enough football people down there, does Daniel Farke have a little bit more control than we actually know? And this could be the big problem.
And do you know what really surprises me? It seems to me that I know they're only a sponsor at this moment in time, but when the Red Bull interest in Leeds and the investment was first sold to the fans, it wasn't just a matter of them investing in the club. It was, look how much more. I remember Parag talking about it at the time, look how much more we can learn from these football people. They've been involved in various clubs throughout the world now for a number of years, and we can learn from them just as much as they can learn from us. Well, it seems like Red Bull don't seem to be playing any kind of part, at least none that I can see at the moment, because it seems as though we're not being steered by football people at the moment. We're not making the right football decisions. So I do worry about that. You know, I would have liked to have felt that we do have proper contingency plans in place. You know, when you talk about replacing Daniel Farke, you know, I would like to think the football people at Leeds know who the second one is, or who the first choice would be to take over from Farke. And that if that first choice isn't available or is unattainable for whatever means, there's a second and a third option in place. And they've already tried and tested it, and they know that that person will fit into the structure. I'd like to think any proper business has contingency plans in place for the worst case scenario. And I'm hoping we have that at Leeds. I get the funny feeling that we don't.
Yeah.
It'll be the usual scramble for the usual names rather than picking like I don't know how to pronounce the coach's name at Brighton, Hertzler, rather than picking a Hertzler, I think he's called, from nowhere, who nobody's ever heard of, or a Danny Roll, for example. You know, he's up at Rangers now, ironically, you know, in place from the 49ers, but it was somebody else that plucked him from nowhere. You know, I get the feeling that we don't have our finger on the pulse in terms of new coaches and coaches that could fit into the system at Leeds and really get us up and running immediately. I just don't feel as though we've got that. That's a bit worrying.
Yeah, we were talking as well, weren't we, about like the stadium expansion. I mean, I've just had a quick look at when you were talking there, an article on when we first acquired Red Bull and what Parag was saying, and there was kind of an insinuation that obviously there was going to, you know, they were going to lean on them for certain things, and a little bit of it wasn't obviously, you know, word verbatim, but it was, you know, we're going to lean on them. They're going to help us with the expertise, when the question was referred as well to the transfer market. So you're kind of looking at that in terms of additions and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it just feels at this moment in time, if the worst was to happen to Leeds, the stadium plans would get sort of plugged a little bit. But you've mentioned a couple of times that, you know, even in the Championship, you feel like they might go ahead with it. But it absolutely stinks. And I never thought it would be like this. But worst case scenario, and we did go down to the Championship, which is probably about 80% reality now, especially with where we are and the games that we've got coming up, which we'll speak about in a second. But it feels like that acquisition for Red Bull to take over Leeds United is only a matter of time.
Well, maybe you get that feeling, especially with the Rangers distraction as well, you know. But I suppose the group of investors that they pulled together who are involved at Leeds have got involved in Leeds as a project and not Rangers. So it'll be interesting to see how that future sale.
It's a different group, innit? It's a different group.
Yeah, it's a different group as well. And it'd be interesting to see how that could happen, because obviously you've got multiple people that have got interests in Leeds United. It's not just one person or two or three people that own the club. It's multiple people by the sounds of it.
Do you think almost you need, sorry to interrupt, but do you almost think you need at some stage like Parag to be replaced? You know, if he's president of Leeds United now and there's like almost like a lead of the 49ers enterprises, is there a conversation to be had that maybe, but obviously Parag's vice president with Andrew Kavanagh, who's obviously the head honcho at Rangers, and clearly they're, you know, firing Christian Stewart and they're getting rid of Kevin Thelwell up there in the week, and there's interviews being done by Kavanagh on Sky Sports and all that sort of stuff. Feels like there's mass interest up there. Maybe it's because Rangers are in the Champions League as well. They see that as a cash cow of which maybe they might be able to topple Celtic, and maybe that's where Parag's attention is. Is there a conversation to be had that the head honcho at Leeds United is replaced by someone who is different, who is maybe spearheading the San Francisco 49ers enterprises, but hasn't got distractions elsewhere? Because let's be honest, he's still got interest as well in the 49ers, you know, over in the States.
I mean, I don't know how the 49ers ultimately view this, kind of whether they'd rather have one of their own people like Parag in charge at Leeds, or whether they're quite happy to go out there and recruit somebody to do the job of Parag. It seems to me that is, you know, outwardly, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of interest in Leeds at the moment. It's like we said on our previous get together. It just seems to me like there's a general apathy at the moment. There's not a great deal being said, and they're a bit like that. They're a bit cloak and dagger. We know for one that they don't want to interact with content creators like yourself. They just don't want to do that. So they tend to be secretive anyway. So maybe this is just the way the 49ers.
Which I don't mind though. We've spoken before about, like, when you look at Villa, for instance, and we had Max on, you kind of want your owners to be quieter. That's what you want.
You do, but they're very purposeful. Those owners down at Villa, aren't they? I mean, they crack on, they get the job done. They're very positive in wanting, and very ambitious in wanting to move Villa forwards. And you know, I was listening to your piece, you know, with the Villa guy, the Villa on tour person, you know, about how they had their own issues during the summer in terms of spending and making sure that things work with PSR. But here they are now. They're a different comparison to us anyway, Villa. But yeah, I just feel that I don't know how the 49ers view Parag at the moment. Obviously, they feel that it's right the way it's set up at the moment, that he's got his fingers in at least 3 pies. But from a Leeds United perspective, for me, there just doesn't seem to be a real feeling about the club that they're really. It seems to be messy. We just seems to be floating in the sea. We seem a little bit rudderless. There's no guidance. There's no clear direction about how we're going to achieve and maintain Premier League status. It just all seems a bit a bit wishy-washy, and what will be will be. I don't like that side of it.
Would you, as a fan, like to maybe hear from Parag? Would you like to hear from it? I mean, I guess
I'd like to hear.
What would he say?
I'd like to hear from him, Connor, next when he's explaining why we've got a new coach in place. You know, I don't want to hear from Parag right now coming out and saying these are the reasons why we think Daniel Farke should still be in the job. So I don't want that. I don't want to hear that from him. What I would like to hear from him is when the coach does go and they replace him with somebody else, I'd like him to come out and fully support him and say, we believe this is a person that's going to keep us in the Premier League, and we're going to make sure that we support him as best we can. We've heard those words, Connor. We heard exactly those words at the end of the last campaign, but we're going to support him as best we can, trying to achieve that aim.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's kind of what you want to hear, really, isn't it? When it comes to Parag, and yeah, a little bit, just maybe a little bit more clarity. Because, like you say, I agree with you. It's kind of, we're all kind of making our own assumptions now. I don't know if football fans do that. Of course they do. We all hypothesize. We all create scenarios of which maybe aren't actually the case. But it feels like we all know where this is going. It's a very clear path. And I think the biggest frustration about it all, and we've said it multiple times, they've not learned, have they? They've not learned. It's the same thing.
Inevitability about it. And you came out with that interesting figure, didn't you? About is it you've got a 70% uplift in points if you sack your coach?
Yeah.
Is it up until November compared to a 40% uplift if you do it in January? And what I don't get is you see all of these media outlets. We were just watching Sky Sports earlier on this morning. They're all talking about keeping Daniel Farke, and I would over the next 3 games. There doesn't seem to be any logic to that argument. And I said to you afterwards, you know, why is it good for clubs like Forest and West Ham? Why is there no media backlash when they sack a coach earlier on in the season because they feel as though there's a need for a change, and they do get an uplift in the results, quite clearly seen by Forest over the last couple of weeks? Why is it okay for those other clubs, but everybody says, "Oh no, Leeds should stick with the coach"?
Well, I was saying to you though,
bizarre, isn't it?
But the difference is, we're a newly promoted side. We're expected to get relegated.
It's still a Premier League club, Connor.
No, I understand that, but there seems to be this thing with Leeds, like that. I feel the general media are not looking at the fact that we are struggling massively. All the data is downward turning. We are now possession heavy laden as a newly promoted side with nowhere near enough technical ability to compete in that way. We've moved away from the style of football that got us into really good positions this season, and which was helping us in the first half against even the other day against Villa, which they struggled with. You had Iriola earlier on in the season saying we really struggled to deal with Leeds' physicality. That's Bournemouth. Really struggled to deal with Leeds' physicality and their intensity. We've dropped off from that, and I think the general media don't quite understand. It's just such a blanket statement. You hear all the time. We had a laugh about it this morning, didn't we? Because it's just so obvious what they're going to say. Well, you look at where Leeds are at. They've got 11 points after 12 games. You've got to give him more time. But it's like, what?
Yeah, they're only a goal off being 17th rather than 18th. Yeah, but there's all this like, there are all these apologists out there for Daniel Farke.
Oh,
it's incredible. It's why I just have a look at the facts for what they are at the moment. We are third bottom. We're entering a period now where we've got 6 games coming up where it's highly unlikely that we're going to register a point in those 6 games.
And we played 8 at the bottom 10, and we're in the bottom 3.
Yeah.
Objectively, we are literally the bottom. We could talk about, and we were saying about
that's the fact. We're in the bottom 3, whether it's a goal difference or not. We are in the bottom 3.
Well, this is what Farke was saying yesterday, and this is kind of where the frustration, I think, it builds a lot with Leeds fans and me as well. You know, when he's saying, "Oh well, the data this, the data that," are you Jesse Marsh? Because Jesse Marsh was getting hounded, battered for comments like that, and now you're seeing basically Farke coming out talking about possession, which he's done for that last month.
Sorry, but the data tells us that Leeds are third bottom. That's only the only data I'm interested in is looking at the points tally on the Premier League board. I'm not interested in all the other stuff that Farke's coming out about XG and this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it, and possession, and what could have been had we held on for 95 minutes, but conceding in the 92nd or 93rd, which we've done in at least 2 games this year where we've lost 4 points. I'm not interested in all of that. The reality, the data that I'm interested in is having to look at that Premier League table. That's all that matters at the end of the day. And we are now behind track.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like it's like, these press conferences, there's normally been a possession conversation, there's been an XG conversation, but now we can't lean on that. It's now turning into the conversation about the summer. And he's obviously got these sort of caveats, which he's bringing into the press conference now. And it's excuse laden for me. It's absolute. And I think the overarching point here when we're talking about this is, where do Leeds go? How do Leeds get over these hurdles? And it just feels like we can moan about this, we can moan about that. The solution is to sack Daniel Farke. But for me, it had to be done in the international break. It's not been done in the international break. I thought it'd at least be done after Villa. It's still not done. And we were talking about this. For me, he's going to be still in the job against Brentford. We probably lose if we did lose against Brentford, we're going to the international break. Sorry, not the international break, the January transfer window, because I think we play Brentford around about the 14th. Then just before the transfer window, give us about 2 weeks, give or take. I think they'll then get rid of him. But they were saying on the general media space, they were saying, oh, well, you'll still be within touching distance. It's like, well, what if we're not? It's another 3 games, 3 or 4 games.
The comment was Leeds probably won't be cut adrift over the next 3 games. I think that's when we thought, what? We're already adrift. I understand what they mean by cut adrift. Like there's a margin between 17th and 18th. But, who's to say that West Ham won't pick up a win against Liverpool? Shambolic position and form they're showing at the moment. They've got them, I think, over the weekend, haven't they, West Ham? Yeah. Who's to say that Fulham can't go to Tottenham and pick up a point or pick up 3 points the way it is at the moment for Tottenham? They're in some disarray as well. So, to say that we may not be cut adrift within the next 3 games, why not just replace the coach, Connor? Why not? I hate this term free hit, but get a coach in. It's going to take him at least a couple of weeks to get used to the way things operate down at Ellen Road and to get his new people in. By the time he's done that, those 3 games are pretty much going to be out of the way. It's got a chance for him to get his feet under the table, assess what he's got, and then make a real go of it when we get away from.
All right. Well, for argument's sake, then
Chelsea and Liverpool. Then we've got Brentford, I think, Palace, 2 really, really difficult games. But at least we've got those other games out of our system. We've got a chance to maybe try and work out and pick up points in those 2 games.
Well, for argument's sake, let's say, because the narrative is now, and this is why we should have done it earlier, but why would a coach come in now? Why would you employ a coach to come in and just get battered by these sides? Why would you do that? What if that's the rebuttal that some people are still saying? Wouldn't you then go for a coach for the Brentford game who can come in and potentially get a win?
Yeah, but then you're gambling on the Brentford game, aren't you? You've got somebody who's fresh, and you talk about this new manager bounce. Well, I'm not sure if I believe in that. But then you've got somebody new who's raw, who's maybe only been in at the club 3 or 4 days, going into a Brentford match. Is that ideal preparation for that game? It's not, is it? It's not ideal preparation. You get somebody in now. It's not going to happen before the City game. That's going to be done and dusted. We know that. But you get somebody in as soon as you possibly can, because you would be earmarking those games. A very, very difficult game against Brentford, but you'd have to be earmarking those games as an opportunity to pick up points. So I wouldn't leave it three days before and appoint a coach at that stage. That's just mad.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think as well, like there's a bit of hope. There's a bit of hope. You go into these games, and even if you go into the big games, and you might, you look at Chelsea at home, you look at Liverpool, and you might be, if you're on a great day and on their worst day, you might be able to nick a point. That lifts the whole place. You then go into Brentford, you then go into the January transfer window, of which Farke said that there might be some additions. I think my worry is right now, it's really difficult, because you look as well at the Marsh scenario. You look against Liverpool and Bournemouth, and that period of time of which we, the media and everybody else was, Liverpool were unbelievable back then. Bournemouth were growing into a very good side. We're never going to get anything from those 2. We then got 2 of those wins. I've got a feeling that this board, if Farke gets a win in the next 3, and we all want Farke to get a win in the next 3, we all want him to get a win in the next 3. My worry is then, though, that they're not proactive, papering over the cracks. They're then not thinking to themselves, right, okay, he's got a win, but you look at the performances, you look at the downward turn, you look at exactly the same parallels that we've seen from here as to here, and then you go into January. And this is the worst case scenario for me, because how Farke was talking the other day was that Leeds are going to do some business in January. You then go in and back Daniel Farke in January. Then you probably go into late Jan, Feb, and then sack him. That is you've not learned a thing. You've not learned a thing, and that's my worry. So it's kind of a bit like, I think it just has to be a change. They just have to make a change. They have to make it soon.
Yeah. It's so obvious that a change needs to happen. There's all of this. I mean, it's fresh now in the media. People are talking about it. They weren't talking about it 3-4 games ago when you were talking about it. It's now very fresh in people's minds. And we're all keeping half an eye, aren't we, on the various media outlets, wondering, is there something happening behind the scenes? That's only going to increase. People are very, very much aware of the situation at Leeds, and that, Burnley is still sticking with their man. They obviously think he's the best person at this stage. Will they be looking at this if they continue on a downward spiral? Maybe they're happy with the way things are.
But they spent less. The squad was ripped apart, the spine, and it's a complete. I think Burnley's a completely different expectation to what Leeds really should be with kind of our projection and our trajectory. I just think, the size of the club, the Red Bull investment, which was made into a massive thing last season, San Francisco 49ers' first real go at the Premier League, or spending 100 million quid, just felt like the weight of expectation was a little bit higher for Leeds. Leeds were going to go at it again with proper ownership. Burnley, with the greatest of respect, I know Alan Pace has come in and there's a difference of ownership there, but I think he was with them then when they were in the Premier League with Vincent Kompany as well, where they got battered. But it felt like with Leeds, I felt with a team that everybody was backing to stay in the Premier League.
Yeah. And Sunderland have surprised us. They were the team that everybody was suggesting, weren't the pre-season, that we're going to go straight back down. I mean, that's a natural assumption, based on the fact that they just managed to get through in terms of the playoff final, and we were like 25 points along with Burnley ahead of them in the final table. So that's a natural thing to assume. But there was always that worry, the odds were always on the fact that there was probably going to be at least 2 of these Premier League teams promoted teams coming back down. And, we've got to make a change, Connor. We all know that. It's very prevalent out there at the moment that Farke's position is under threat, and we need to make that change. What is the point in hanging around till January when half the transfer window's gone and we've gone through another 7 or 8 matches where we've not picked up points? What is the point in that? Let's get rid of him now. Let's concentrate on trying to keep in the Premier League, get the new person in as soon as possible. Let's try and change this thing.
Well, as well, I guess just before we get into the City game, because I know there's not that much to talk about with the City game, but him turning it around, I think this is going to be like turning around the Titanic right now. And normally when you see managers going on this trajectory, normally when you see the managers getting to this stage, they panic, don't they? A lot of the time they panic. I don't think Daniel Farke's panicking. I think a lot of it is just, I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm sticking to my principles. And I guess a classic case and example in that is the likes of Brendan Harrison, the same predictable substitutions, the poor in-game management, which we're still seeing. And is actually, it feels like he's gone to the board. It feels like he's gone to the board. I'm doing it my way. I'm moving away from this. But overall, what I was going to say there is, I don't think there's a panic from him whatsoever, but I don't see, there's no way there's enough, in my opinion, as a coach, and we've seen this now for 3 years, nigh on 3 years, there's nowhere near, as a coach, he has enough in his arsenal to be able to turn this round for me, and that's the big difference. And I'd like to know how he turns this around. What does Daniel Farke do? Because you know what his principles are. We know how stubborn he is. We know his tactical limitations. To turn this around, you've just mentioned there, the 17th of January is probably the next proper winnable game that Leeds have against Fulham at home. I don't understand what he is able to do as a coach, as Daniel Farke as a coach, to turn all this around, unless Leeds chuck another 100 million at him in January, which we're not going to do.
Well, he's not doing it, and he's also made other choices as well at the moment, hasn't he? He's certainly nailed his colours to the mast as far as Aronson's concerned. Nonso seems to be like a part player at the moment. I don't know why. You know, is the obvious card that we can play and try to turn games around. You don't give him 10 minutes towards the end of the match when it takes him at least 10 minutes just to warm up and to get into the flow of the game. Doesn't make sense. So I agree with you. We're not going to see any difference from Farke. I think what's interesting here and what maybe people haven't properly explored about is from his mindset, from his psychology, Daniel Farke. What's he got to lose? If Leeds go back down out the Premier League, what's Daniel Farke got to lose? Because that was the expectation anyway. You know, we came up, as champions. We had 100 points on the board, and we were kind of expected to be, as you've just said, the one team out of the three that have got the best chance of staying up. But really,
when you say what's he got to lose? Are you thinking like just change your style of play, just do it this way?
No, I just think in terms of his employment with Leeds United, what's he got to lose? He knows that he's going to get a payout if he's sacked. He knows that he's going to walk away with his head held up high because he's achieved 190 points over 2 seasons with Leeds, and he's got us back into the Premier League. But unfortunately, I didn't get the right kind of backing, and I'm amazed behind the scenes they're not a bit peeved about this, because he's hinting at it in almost every press conference that he's not had the right kind of backing. That's exactly what happened at Norwich. So he's giving himself a get out of jail free card here. So as far as he's concerned, he is relaxed in press because he can afford to be. If Leeds go down, it's not really going to affect him. Daniel Farke is going to have at least 23, 24 clubs in the Championship that would willingly pay for his services to get them out of that league. He's going to have multiple job offers throughout Europe as well. So, you know, from his perspective, you know, if they go down, they go down. If I get sacked, I get sacked.
Right. Should we move on to City? Obviously, that game coming up. I think this is why it's quite good that we've just done a bit of a natter about everything, really, because you're kind of getting into that point of which, I mean, I wonder what the odds are, but this would be quite. I mean, they lost midweek, didn't they, at home? So you're expecting a reaction, aren't you? So it's in. I don't know in what if there's 90, if there's 100 worlds, I can see us maybe getting a result in one of them.
Yeah, and it's going to be a difficult watch along, I think, for you tomorrow, isn't it? So it's good. Certainly do tune in. I'll be watching you, Connor, that's for sure. But yeah, it's going to be a difficult game for us. Let's be honest. You know, if we pick up anything from this, you just never know, do you? You never know. You know, stranger things happen in football. You just never know. Could go there. Could have a really, really bad day. They could be off it for whatever reason. You know, who knows? Who knows? You know, God could be on our side, and he might strike 3 or 4 of them down with an overnight fever, and they might not be able to feature tomorrow morning. Who knows? But they've still got 3 or 4 people that can adequately come in and fill those positions.
Just feels a bit pointless talking about, doesn't it? That's kind of where I'm at with City.
It almost does, you know, and being, you know, we're just being realistic, aren't we? We're not being negative. We're being realistic. We're comparing the 2 squads, and we're looking at the likelihood of Leeds getting something out of this is very, very low. You know, let's hope that we can. Let's hope that we can. The next best thing we can hope for is that we try and keep the goal count down. You know, if we can try and keep the goal count down, you know, that's an important thing for any team going into the next game. Nobody wants to be absolutely mullered and mauled. And that's something that's going to be tough as well, because we do seem to be seeping goals, unfortunately, at the moment. So it's going to be a tough day at the office tomorrow. There's no doubt. There's no point in over talking it. You know, we know what it is. Let's just see, you know, and, you know, do you know what? It'd be absolutely great, Connor, if we went there and we put in a really committed performance. You know, I'd like to see more of what we saw in the first half against Villa. You know, if we can treat it somehow as a home fixture, we can get those players fully pumped up and at it and at them. Who knows? That's what I would like to see, whether we win, draw, or lose the game. You know, if we can really see a fully committed, passionate home type performance away, that's going to put us in good stead, I feel, for the oncoming games.
I think as well, Longstaff being in is kind of a Longstaff being out is kind of a bit of a blessing, because it means that this is literally the only way we're going to see Tanaka. We're not Farke's like. So
definitely.
Tanaka comes in. Probably the likelihood is, I mean, where would you? I mean, this would be my team. I would go with Perry and net. Keep talking into that mic straight on, by the way. Perry and net. Bogle. Disagree whenever you want here, by the way. I would then go Rodon and Beale if he's to play his formation. I'd then go with Gabby Goodmanson. By the way, I would change formation, but I know he's not going to do it. And then in a midfield 3, I would go for Tanaka and Ampadu as some sort of pivot. In front of them, in the 10, I would go Nonso. On the left, I go Okafor. Right, I go James. And then I would go Lucas Mecha up top.
That sounds reasonable to me. Obviously, the Bijol one is the interesting one, him coming in. But we may well
not Nonso in the 10.
No, but Bijol coming in is interesting as well, isn't it? Because I know he's had his few detractors really as Bijol, hasn't he? So a Nonso, I agree. But is that going to happen? He just seems to have something against Willie at the moment, doesn't he? I don't know what's going on there. But that seems good for me. I mean, the important thing is we don't try and play out from the back. No. We start playing out from the back, you know. What's
we did
happen.
Against Arsenal.
We did, and look what happened. So, you know, that would be nice to see. You know, we were a bit quicker in getting the ball forwards, weren't we, against Villa? And it looked good when we were doing that. He needs to really have his finger on the pulse as well in terms of watching what they're doing. It's not just watching what we're doing; it's watching what they're doing as well.
Well, as well, that keep it.
We could see that, couldn't we, from the Villa coach, how he was able to analyse the game very quickly and identify our weak spots. We need to try and. To do have any weak spots, we need to be aware of that.
That's arguably, even with Longstaff out, even with Stack out, that's arguably a stronger team because you've got Nonto in that 10, of which, if we are playing a little bit longer, we're having the box defenders, which if the balls are, we know City like to work it round, but I'd like to see a little bit more of Jakobil, and I think it's a flip of a coin between him and Strauch at the minute. So if we are to play the ball a little bit long and a little bit more direct, I love the ball maybe hitting Lucas Mecha or Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and I think that play off in Nonto really close to him, and Nonto is going to be 100% better if the ball hits Mecha. He's going to be 100% better in getting the ball under his spell than Longstaff running on or Aronson running on, because he's got better close control, much better in those pockets as well. And Nonto has the technical ability to be able to cause City centrally a little bit of problems. And the thing is, when you look at his attributes, that low center of gravity, that balance, that good ball striking ability, Nonto in that number 10, he will be involved a lot more as well, because obviously the central part of the pitch is involved a lot more. Anyway, a lot of people say, well, what about the physicality? We could have everybody fit, and the physicality in that midfield doesn't matter if we've got Stack or Longstaff. The physical, because the physicality is not just about height and you know, it's about stamina. It's about, you know, it's about jewels. It's about real athleticism, and City have that in abundance. So we're always going to get done on the physicality side of it. But I'd just like to say that I think it shows it's unpredictable. I don't think Pep Guardiola would be able to predict that as well.
Also, he knows how to get a free kick, Connor. Let's be honest, doesn't he? So if he does receive
the ball, he got 2 when he came on, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And if he does receive the balls and knock down from Mecha, you know, he's in and around the box, and all of a sudden he gets a foul. You know, that could be a situation which we could benefit from.
100%. Well, guys, we will leave it there. We've been nattering on for around about 50 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed it. We are quite enjoying doing these things in person as well. These shows normally are on the Patreon, and they will be on the Patreon a little bit more as well. But it is quite nice having the old boy on the YouTube channel as well. So let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Join us for the watch along. Catch out the press conference reaction from yesterday as well if you're interested in that. It was an interesting one, and we really delved into the comments of Daniel Farke and what they could actually mean. And we will see you on the other side. Cheers.